Hey everyone, welcome to session 308 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. In this episode, sleep expert Emily Varon returns to the show to share her extensive expertise in sleep improvement, especially with individuals with autism. Drawing from 15 years of experience, Emily discussed the importance of personalizing sleep intervention approaches, the role of wearable technologies, and the importance of sensitivity when discussing sleep challenges with families. She also discusses new research on screen time and its true impact on sleep latency. Spoiler alert, it's kind of complicated. You'll have to check it out to learn more. And it was probably one of the more interesting aspects of this conversation. But that notwithstanding, this episode offers insights that may change how behavior analysts approach sleep-related interventions. If this work sounds interesting to you and you'd like to learn more, Emily kindly provided listeners with a 10% coupon code for her Sleep Collective course. It's BXOB10. Just go to her website, Ready, Set, Sleep, to learn more. And I'll have that code at behavioralobservations.com at our show notes. Again, this is a really fun episode. She's fun to talk to. Lots of great information. I think you're really going to like it. Before we get to the conversation, though, I want to let you know that we are brought to you by the following sponsors. Frontera. Consider taking a demo of Frontera's assessment builder and see how the ethical application of AI technologies can help you serve clients and save you time. Your first assessment report is free, and if you use code BOP25, you'll get an additional 5 assessments for just $100. So just head to fronterahealth.com to learn more. We're brought to you by CEUs from yours truly. Yeah, that also helps keeps the lights on here at Behavioral Observations. Learn from your favorite podcast guests while you're commuting, walking the dog, or whatever else you happen to do while you listen to podcasts. New events are being added all the time, so go to behavioralobservations.com/get CEUs to learn more. We're also brought to you by the Behavioral Toolbox. If you're a school-based behavioral professional, you're going to want to go to thebehavioraltoolbox.com because we have 3 courses right now and more in development ready and waiting for you. We've got stuff on general classroom practices, how to function as a consultant in a school setting, and our latest course, motivational interviewing. All 3 of them have gotten great reviews. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on them, so go check it out there. And last but not least, we're brought to you by my friends at Behavior University. Yes, their mission is to provide university-quality professional development for the busy behavior analysts. I just chatted with them recently, and they've got some great stuff coming up that I can't talk about quite yet, but boy, stay tuned. In the meantime, they've got plenty of things like supervision courses, RBT courses, live webinars, on-demand CEUs, and lots more. So go to behavioruniversity.com/observations and use the promo code podcast to save at checkout. All right, that's it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, please enjoy this fun conversation about sleep with Emily Varon.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now, here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Emily Varon, welcome back to the Behavioral Observations podcast. How's it going today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun catching up with you.
For sure. And catch up we will, because you've got a lot of exciting things going on. I got to start with kind of like an offbeat question. My father was an accountant, and I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. And whenever we'd meet someone at like a barbecue or like a holiday party or whatever, and you do the inevitable, what do you do for a living? Well, this is what I do. What do you do? That sort of thing. You know, he always say he's an accountant, and then people would start asking him tax advice.
Yes.
And he loved it, by the way. He didn't get bent out of shape about it or anything like that, because for some reason he loved helping people out and stuff like that. And anyway, so when people find out what you do they burden you with their sleep problems as a sleep expert, or
They do, but I don't feel like it's a burden.
Okay.
I love it. I love when people tell me they're terrible sleepers, or when they say like, oh, my 3-year-old, or gosh, my 7-year-old, or my husband or my aunt or whatever. But yeah. Actually, funny enough, my father-in-law is an accountant too.
It's funny. A few years ago, I interviewed Dr. Matt Johnson from Johns Hopkins about his research in psilocybin, and I can only imagine people regale him in stories of, college times and whatnot. And I'm like, that must really get old after a while. But anyway, that's
I think it's a little different than it was when we were 22 and camping in the forest and stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I think people are interested in their own sleep, and I think people are interested in their children's sleep. It's just something a lot of people aren't getting, and they don't understand it. And you know, I think when they say, "Oh, ha ha ha, I'm such a terrible sleeper," "Oh, can you help? Can you help a 52-year-old adult or whatever?" And they laugh like, "Ha ha," like they're not helpable or something like that, or they're beyond help. And then I start actually asking them questions, and they sort of backtrack, and they're like, "Oh, wait, I was just kidding. Wait, no, I don't actually want to change anything. I don't actually want the advice unless it's for their children. But when it's for themselves, it's like, wait. Oh, you mean I have to what?"
Well, whenever so I wear a Whoop strap, as you know, and it gives you analytics on your sleep. And right now, I have had one of these for so long. I can predict, although sometimes I do get surprised, but most of the time I can predict what it's going to be before I look at the analytics in the morning, and I
Okay.
can predict it because essentially speaking purely for myself, but getting good sleep it involves behavior change. Like I know it's like there are. I'm not downplaying the role of people who are really into and credentialed in areas of nutrition and things like that. And at the same time, at least for me, I know the stuff that I eat that's not good for me, and I know the extent to which I overeat. I can gain weight very easily and whatnot. And so like sleep is the same way. I know if okay, I stayed up too late, trying to finish this book I'm reading, or whatever. Like anyway. So yeah, to your point, let's get like well, yeah, you're improving your sleep is going to involve changing your behavior
Yeah.
and making choices that you're not making right now.
Yeah, and look, I can predict my sleep too because I wear an Oura Ring, which is very similar to the Whip strap. They give very detailed data. But don't forget, over time, it was the correlate between that number that you see in the morning and what you did the day before and some reflection on that, right? So if, when I first got my Oura Ring and I was like, oh, wow, that was a good sleep. I wonder what I did yesterday. Or, oh, that was a terrible sleep. I wonder what I did yesterday. And that sort of line of thinking sort of shapes up these correlates between yeah, I can wake up in the morning and see that I got a 94 with a crown. Like anyone who wears the Oura Ring knows the crown is you want the crown, right? Everybody's aiming for the crown. But it took a while for me to figure out what were the contributing factors for me, right? So I know I didn't learn until after I started wearing a wearable that I cannot eat meat at dinner and I will sweat all night and I will be up all night and it will just wreck my sleep. Now, that doesn't mean don't eat meat, but for me at dinner time, I have to consume my red meat, way before dinner time. I just can't have it at dinner anymore. It just doesn't sit well with my body and it affects my sleep. And so, you could say that you argue the same thing for sugars, for, things that are high in fat. You can argue the same thing for whether you exercise or not the day before, or how much exercise you get the day before. And you start sort of building up these correlates and say okay, you know what? I did that yesterday and I had a really good sleep. So I'm going to try and do that again. Or, wow, that was the third awful night of sleep I had after I had a steak for dinner. And go okay, Emily, maybe we don't eat steak at dinner anymore. But, you know, everyone has sort of different hormones, different digestion, different rates of digestion, different athletic patterns and stuff like that during the day, different tolerances for caffeine and sugars and things like that. But it really is about sort of knowing yourself and not necessarily saying, oh, this was true for that person, so it must be true for me. You really do have to do a little sort of, self-reflection and say what's working and what's not working. And
Yeah,
that's really what I teach in my courses too, is that it's not about what's good or bad. I mean, we don't know what's good or bad from one human to the next. And, this kind of wraps us into our treatment piece here. But, it's not about good or bad. It's about, what's working and what's not working, what's sustainable and what's not sustainable. And, we go based on that and how we advise other people, right? I'm not going to say like, this is bad. No, it's not. Nothing is inherently bad. I mean, very few things, I should say, are inherently bad. It's just sort of our responses to them.
I think that's where these wearables, to your point, you can reflect on what you did the day before and over some period of time. The Whoop strap through the app, you can log different activities, and it prompts you to. It's funny because there's like a little bit of the ABC effect that goes along with this, because it prompts you like, how many servings of caffeine did you have?
Are you going to choose to lie to yourself today,
Yeah.
or be honest
How much
with yourself?
alcohol did you drink? And like when was it? And there's other things that you can ask it to prompt you
Yeah.
to ask for, but it's an interesting self-management tool. So anyway, so we kind of like jumped right into it here. I want to backtrack a little bit. So you've been on the podcast before. I meant to go back and look when it was, but it's probably about a year or two ago, I would say. And I know you.
December or January of 23, 24.
Yeah, and I know you've been quite busy and had a lot of things going on and a lot of kind of exciting developments. So for those who might not have caught that first episode, just to tell the audience who you are, what you do, what your calling and all that stuff as it relates to this work.
Yeah. Well, I call myself a sleep educator because there's not really much else to really call myself. But I've been treating sleep in the autism population since 2010. I've been in the field since 2000. So, been around 25 years or so, just really focusing on sleep, for the last 15 years or so. And I have some asynchronous CEUs. I do some speaking. I've been keynoting a little bit more, bigger conferences. I'll be presenting, things like that. Just kind of getting the word out about sleep in the autism community and how we can treat it as BCBAs, how it's within our scope. I have my certification course, which is great. And should I give you the coupon code? I have a coupon code for your listeners. Is that okay?
Yeah, for sure. I like discounts. I assume my listeners do too. So
if you are interested in sort of learning how to be a sleep practitioner within your community, you can go to readysetsleep.com, sign up for the Sleep Collective. It's a 5-week course, one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and you can get 10% off for being a behavioral observations listener. And the code is B as in boy, X, like behavioral, OB. So BXOB10. So behavioral observations 10, BXOB10.
all right.
Get 10% off the Sleep Collective. I don't think I've ever plugged myself in that way. Like I felt like the commercial just ends.
That's right.
Look, the Sleep Collective is really fun.
And the operators are standing by, and the turnstiles are open. I think there's a
don't forget to tip your waiter.
There's a cake song.
No, but I mean, look, the Sleep Collective is really great for people who are very interested in sleep and serving sleep in their community. It's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to be in that specialty role, but for the people who really are interested in sleep and find sleep fascinating, the 5 weeks are just so eye-opening, and everyone who comes out of the Sleep Collective just feels like, wow, I actually have actionable items. I can actually treat this in an ethical ABA manner rather than feeling like, well, okay, just, have better sleep hygiene and a good bedtime routine and walk them back to bed and do extinction and all that stuff that, only kind of works. But,
Got it. So I will have links to those things in the show notes for those who are interested in pursuing this further. You can just go to behavioralobservations.com. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break here, and I want to draw your attention to my friends over at Behavior University. And if you listen to the show for a while, you know what's coming next. I'm looking at their live webinars. There's 6 of them posted right now. And guess what? Almost half of them are sold out already. And these look like great webinars. So if you go to behavioruniversity.com and click on their live webinars and you see something that sounds interesting to you, like Inspiring Flexible Eating in Children with Food Selectivity by Dr. Holly Gover, or what's this one here? Supporting Female Teens with Low Support Needs by Dr. Carla Schmidt. There's a couple of other ones. Oh, Achieving Long-Term Successful Outcomes for Children with Autism. I could go on. These are awesome. These sound super interesting, and they're going to sell out. So go to behavioruniversity.com, go to their live webinars, find something that suits your practice area, and sign up before it's too late. And while you're there, you can check out their RBT courses, their supervision courses, some of their pre-recorded on-demand CEUs. I believe Emily has also been a presenter at Behavior University as well. So again, go to behavioruniversity.com/observations to get that promo code, or just go to the link in the show notes for this episode. All right, let's get back to the conversation. You came to me with some really interesting new research on screens and how they relate to sleep and things like that. And maybe we can do some myth busting during this episode.
Yes.
But I want to make sure that we're, again, all in the same kind of playing field. And, having seen your talk at the Oklahoma ABA conference, there's just a lot of great kind of like just baseline information that people should know. And I'm not going to ask you to, kind of reprise your talk here in this podcast. But, if there were a couple of key points about sleep that you'd want the audience to know that would perhaps elevate their understanding beyond where, the average person, what would be those things?
Yeah. I think a good takeaway for BCBAs is that we're not really treating sleep. We're treating the systems that maintain or reinforce the reinforcing value of sleep, right? I think sometimes we forget that sleep is a primary reinforcer, right? We learn that in BCBA school, and then we quickly forget it. We put it up there with food and water. But sleep is a primary reinforcer, and it's, susceptible to environmental variables. So if we look at sleep treatment as just improving the systems that can enhance the reinforcing value of sleep, then we come at it from a true behavioral lens, and we can ask a lot more questions about the environment. And so some of that might be sleep hygiene, which is, it's elusive. I mean, sleep hygiene for one person, that there are certain standards of like what we should and shouldn't be doing before bed, like from the sleep sciences. So, major exercise very close to sleep. They say that, an hour before sleep, we probably shouldn't be doing heavy load exercises, big cardio, things like that. Opt for stretching or yoga or something like that. But we don't want to elevate our heart rate, right? Too close to sleep onset. So that's like one thing is, part of the sleep hygiene is making sure that there is readiness for sleep, and that readiness for sleep will be the thing that manipulates the reinforcing value of sleep. It's either going to kill your sleep drive or it's going to enhance your sleep drive, right? So exercise is one thing, keeping a relatively steady schedule, right? And this is sometimes a lot of the work we do with our families is figuring out what is the right schedule, right? Do we have a bedtime routine? I don't really mind what's in a bedtime routine as long as there's no like running and jumping and like getting the wiggles out and all that garbage. That stuff doesn't work. But, if there is some kind of a signal to sleep, right? And it doesn't have to be books. Most of our kids aren't going to sit for books. Even the average toddler, I can, walk down my street and knock on 5 doors, and, you're not going to get a 3-year-old who's going to sit nicely for books every night. But having some kind of a rhythm leading up to sleep so that the children get signaled for sleep. And we need that too as adults, right? We actually need bedtime routines, and that's when people approach me at the party, I'll ask them, so what's your bedtime routine? And they're kind of like, well, I look at my phone until I fall asleep, but that's my bedtime routine. Screen time does not a bedtime routine make. But so there are these basic sort of buckets of sleep hygiene that we can say, yeah, I could improve in this area. I could probably have a better wind down routine. I probably could, not, be snacking on, chocolate chip cookies at, 10 o'clock at night, and I'll probably sleep better. Things like that. There are these general buckets that we can sort of adhere to improve our sleep or improve the sleep of our learners, having nothing to do with sleep itself. Right? Having nothing to do. I'm not coming in and waving a magic wand while the child sleeps and like sprinkle my magic pixie dust to be like, now you will sleep. Oh, it's the things we can control and the things that do fall into the category of behavior.
Are you at BCBA feeling overwhelmed by the time and energy it takes to complete intake assessments for kids with autism? You're not alone. When hours are spent on paperwork instead of providing care, it slows everything down for you and the families counting on you. That's why Frontera exists. Frontera is an AI-driven, HIPAA-compliant platform designed specifically for ABA professionals like you. Built by Amal Deshpande, a seasoned founder and father to a child with autism, Frontera brings together clinicians and engineers to streamline the most time-consuming parts of your job. So what does that actually look like? With Frontera's smart tools like the Assessment Builder and Diagnosis Builder, you can reduce your report writing workload from 8 to 10 hours to just 3 to 4. That's more time for therapy, faster access to services, and less burnout. Visit fronterahealth.com to see how it works. Use code BOP25 at checkout to get 15% off both of our report writing tools. Let Frontera help you work smarter so you can focus on what matters most. Like so many other things, the outcome comes from the preparation.
Yes. But isn't that true with everything in ABA, right? Like sometimes we just forget the priming protocols and we go right into treatment and then the child has a big behavior and we're like, oh, we could have probably primed this a little bit better. Like maybe we could have let the child know we're leaving the house before we signal leaving the house, right? Priming is like the best way to improve our own behavior and the behavior and the outcomes of our kids through programming in general. And I use a lot of priming protocols in the sleep programming that I encourage.
All right. So I appreciate that kind of 101, as it were, about how to think about sleep a little bit differently, or at least from more of a behavioral perspective. So let's transition to the screen topic here. So again, you sent me an interesting article, challenging some of the preconceived notions or,
Yeah.
Prevailing understandings of how screens impact sleep. So before we get into maybe some of this, evolving knowledge of what this might look like, walk us through what the kind of historical or prevailing narrative might have been about how screens were thought to have impacted sleep.
Yeah, yes. So we used to think used to. How long have LED screens been around, right? Since like 2009. So historically, since 2008, 2009, right?
Right.
We
way back in 2009.
Back in the mid 2000s. Right, when LED screens sort of came around with the invention of the smart screen and the iPad a little bit later, kind of around when was that, like 2011, 2012 was when the iPad really made its way into, into treatment, actually, into the ABA world for sure, into the autism world 100%, right? The minute the iPad came out, it was like, woohoo, like here's a huge shift in children's behaviors and our behavior and how we were collecting data and how we were running sessions and what we were using for reinforcers and all of that, right? So smart screens had a really huge impact, not just on our population, but what we were finding was that it was having a big impact on sleep. And the more the researchers in the sleep sciences, now these are not, ABA, BCBA is doing this research. This is all sleep scientists doing this research in their clinics, their clinical settings, and the controlled settings, and placebo settings, and things like that. So really valid data coming out showing that the blue light that was coming off of the screens was suppressing melatonin production, and that melatonin suppression was delaying sleep onset. And that was the case for, a good, 12 to 14 years, just depending on, how early the studies are that you look at for blue light. I mean, I think the first article I read about blue light and screen time, I think was somewhere around 2011, 2012. So, we're not talking like 1950s research here, like super substantiated. But what they were noticing is when people consumed their screens, and whether it was, and they did a lot of different tests, Matt, like they looked at things that were really like scary and horrifying versus things that were really calming. Like, did that have an effect? Did it, like the quality of what we were looking at, did that impact our sleep latency? And I'll just keep referring to it as sleep latency, which is just the duration, the amount of time it takes us to fall asleep. Yeah. So it should take the average person under 20 minutes to fall asleep. So what they're looking at sleep latency is more than 20 minutes, right? So what they were finding is, okay, we're going to put people on their games, right? We're going to do gaming versus passive movie watching. We're going to do something really like scary and upsetting versus something that's really calming. So we're going to look at the quality of what was causing sleep onset latency. And they were finding, okay, well, this shifts it by 10 minutes, this shifts it by 2 minutes. So they didn't find a whole lot of variability there. But what they found was, regardless of what it was, being on the screens was delaying sleep onset. And so the kind of reigning hypothesis was that it was the light that was coming off of the screens, because LED light is blue light and blue light is like sunlight, right? And so when we're looking at our screen, it's basically like we're looking at the sun. So our brains don't produce melatonin, which is the hormone that sort of signals the other sleep hormones to get going. So they said, because it's not the quality of what the person is watching, it's not this, it's not that. And they did find some results when people would wear like blue blocking glasses, these orangish blue light blocking glasses. They would say, okay, well, there is some sleep latency there, and that was more significant. And so those studies were really how we got on the blue light bandwagon. So then in 2024, hundreds of years later in 2024, this really groundbreaking study came out showing that when you really look at these other studies, the sleep onset latency was there, but it was really only about 9 or 10 minutes of latency. So the amount of latency was really overblown. So even though they were seeing all this latency in the presence of screens, it just wasn't as profound as we really thought. It wasn't socially significant. It wasn't statistically significant. It just wasn't that significant. And so then this Michael Gradazar is the one who kind of like spearheaded this study. He said, okay, it's only 9 minutes. That's not significant. So what is significant about screen time? Because they did do medical studies that did show that, yes, in the presence of blue light, our melatonin does get suppressed. It does. Like that part isn't wrong, right? It does cause melatonin suppression. But what they found was that the act of the melatonin being suppressed wasn't actually the thing that was causing the later bedtime. So what did they find? They found that it was more personality type and that it was more user error, so to speak. But they found that the behavior of the person using the device was the thing that determined whether there was sleep latency or not. Now, this is really exciting for the behavior scientists, right? This is really exciting for people who study behavior, because now we can say, okay, here are the behaviors we have to look for that are going to either determine whether there is going to be a lot of sleep latency or not. So they've kind of sorted that out, and I'll speak to that in a minute. But I think what's really hard is for people to sort of uncouple this relationship that we have between melatonin and sleep onset.
Yeah.
And so for me, it kind of brings up a bigger question of what is the role of melatonin in sleep onset efficiency? Is there a substantial role? And why are so many people taking melatonin if there really is supplemental melatonin?
Hey everyone, as a BCBA, meeting your continuing ed needs can be challenging at times. That's why I have made selected episodes of the Behavioral Observations podcast available for Type 2 continuing education credits. That's right. You can meet a portion of your professional development requirements on the go. Currently, we have CEs for topics including functional assessment, ethics, and supervision. Come learn from podcast favorites such as Greg Hanley, Pat Fryman, Mark Dixon, as well as many other amazing guests. For more information, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/get-CEs. Those are all awesome questions, and we can get into those, but I want to take a step back here and try to get a better understanding of like who is doing this work. So there's like whenever we talk about like scientists' behavior in an area, in a particular area, there's that tendency to say, and what they found and what the literature says and things like that. And I think when most of our listeners are going to hear about clinical research and applied behavior analysis, they can readily imagine the settings in which those and the people involved, or at least the qualifications or the point of view, et cetera, of the people involved conducting this research. Sleep scientist sounds like a pretty broad category. So I'm curious, like, about the, not just the outcomes, but the scientists doing the work here. Like, what kind of professionals are sleep scientists? Like, where do they
Yeah,
fall? What departments do they work in? And I'm sure there's probably more than one answer, but I'm just curious to what
there
have you
are
learned about that?
there are multiple answers. So there's the medical, right? There's the medical sleep research that is more of what we call like, they're really looking at clinical outcomes from a perspective of medications and or how this actually affects the body, right? So they're testing let's say the melatonin levels, or they're testing, hormones, or they're looking at more the medical. These are doctors. These are medical doctors. So there's the medical sleep sciences. That's one sort of category of sleep scientist, and then there's the non-medical, where they are looking more at behavioral tendencies. They're looking at, like, I remember reading a study about our eating habits the day after a bad night of sleep. So these studies are taking place in controlled environments. So this was actually done at a hotel, like a kind of a resort, where they sort of sequestered this group of people and they systematically either deprived them of sleep or allowed them to get their full sleep. And then they walked them in the next day and had all kinds of activities out and whatnot. But the main feature of the situation was there was just an endless buffet of food, where there were, everything from donuts and cakes and cookies and ice creams to salads and chicken and, just a huge broad range of buffet, all you can eat all day long. And what they were measuring was, did the sleep deprived population go toward the chicken and the salad and like the grains, or did they go towards the cookies and the cakes and and what they found was they went towards the cookies and the cakes and the sugary sweet stuff. And so then they extrapolate information from that. So I would argue that it is behavioral sciences. It's just not coming from BCBAs. So there is a lot of behavioral sleep research happening out there, but one, it's not really happening in the autism community. I mean, that's for sure. We have almost no sleep research in the autism community. It's sad, but we don't. And so we kind of have to look to these other behavioral sciences who are doing things sort of outside of the ABA structure, where they're not, measuring contingencies necessarily, and they're not, doing functional assessments or, manipulating variables in that way, but they are manipulating variables, right? That's how you come out with scientific evidence. But yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of colleges and universities are doing a lot of this. My favorite sleep researcher is Matt Walker. He's out of Berkeley. He has a huge sleep clinic. They do a lot of different kinds of trials. He has a great book that I referred to last time, which is called Why We Sleep, where it's like a meta-analysis of the last like 70 years of sleep research. And so it's interesting to see how they manipulate those variables, because, it is a behavioral science. They're just not BCBAs. They're, from other sort of like sleep science. I actually kind of wish they would use some BCBAs in their studies, because they're sort of winging it, right?
Well, I think the research design too, a lot of these studies, at least from my recollection or the little I've looked at them, are, groups designs or, between subjects designs, to use an old fashioned term. And those have value in certain research applications. But, if nothing beats, repeated measures over time with a smaller number of participants, so kind of, yeah. So anyway, that's, I thank you. I just appreciate the kind of background here, because again, when people say the science says, or they say, and I'm like, okay, there's these vague pronouns here. And, and so like my natural skepticism, kicks in, and I want to know who the they are, or at least broadly speaking, where do they come from, I suppose, in terms of, the orientation and background.
I'm super interested in that. And I'm super interested in how we can kind of replicate some of these studies for the autism community. And I only speak to autism specifically because like the majority of BCBAs right now are really treating within the autism community, I would say. And I think that's kind of where we're living right now. But Yeah, I mean, we're forced to make a lot of assumptions. So, like, I'll talk a little bit more about the new study and the screen time and kind of what it says about human nature and what we do and our tendencies and things like that. And there are a lot of correlates to autism and autism spectrum disorder. But the scientists, them,
Hey,
they aren't really duplicating or replicating these studies within the autism population, and I think we can. I mean, I think we can. I think it just takes, a specific kind of design. But it's funny, I hope he doesn't mind me referencing our very brief conversation, but I did have a chance to talk to Greg Hanley at ABAI for just a hot minute. We were talking about sleep research and stuff like that. And I said, I was expressing to him, gosh, like you closed up shop. He closed up shop. He had a sleep clinic until about like 2013, I think. 2012, 2013 is when he sort of closed up sleep shop. And, I said, you close up your sleep shop and then there was nothing after that. And he said, because sleep is boring. People are just not interested in collecting data overnight and doing things that they can't see and touch and manipulate themselves, where we're sort of relying on caregiver information. Okay, like I get that. I get that. So, he sort of shared with me that, there's sort of like a boring feature, sleep sciences, but I don't know. I disagree. I'm not bored by it.
yeah, well, it's
Interested,
certainly
and
that,
I'm not interested in getting my PhD.
there's and I don't have the citation off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that individuals with autism are disproportionately affected by sleep challenges. Am I making that up?
No, you're not making that up.
Okay.
And I think, interestingly enough, I think that the reasons behind that are not necessarily embedded in the diagnosis itself, but more in the behavioral tendencies of this population, which puts them at greater risk for things like screen time abuse. I say abuse in a very tongue-in-cheek sort of way, but misuse, abuse, to overuse the screens for different reasons. I think they're just a more susceptible population when we're talking about things like screen time, but also things like scheduling and, adhering to routines and following, through with directions and, being, sort of more regulated as far as the sensory system goes. So there are certain things that put the autism population behind the eight ball, so to speak, where it doesn't help that there's a secondary diagnosis of autism on top of the fact that sleep is just really hard for a lot of people in general, like the people at the party who find out that I'm good at sleep. It's like, you know, moths to the flame, right? Everyone now is like, oh, me too, me too, me too.
Sure.
And so we kind of see, okay, well, yeah, I think the autism population is impacted in a bigger way, but they fall under the same susceptibility as everybody else, just a little bit more magnified. So the things that we suggest for the autism population are the same that we would suggest for kids in the neurotypical population or an adult or anything like that. So the same sorts of recommendations and the same sorts of programming. It's just, with a little bit more sensitivity to the kind of pre-existing diagnosis.
I see. Okay, I appreciate there's a little nuance to work through there, but I'm glad you took time to do that. That's important. So these are behavioral characteristics that are, individuals are to use your words, more susceptible to express based off of the learning histories and things like that. All right.
Meaningful change in schools starts with true buy-in from teachers and leaders, but resistance is real. Overloaded with initiatives, educators often feel unheard and overwhelmed. Our online course, Motivational Interviewing, Getting Educator Buy-in, empowers you to create genuine collaboration. Learn to build trust, align with their values, and inspire lasting commitment, not just compliance. Ready to transform engagement? Enroll now at thebehavioraltoolbox.com.
So I kind of interrupted the story about blue light, but I wanted to make sure, I wanted to just get some clarity about the authorities who are making these claims and things like that. So thank you for walking us through that as well. So yeah,
So if it's not blue light, what is it, right?
right. Thank you.
Is that the question? Is that the
Yeah, what's going on here?
Yeah, so what is going on here? So they really find that it's there are certain populations that are just more susceptible. And the number one population that they found that are the most at risk for screen time misuse, let's call it, are children, adolescents, and young adults. So that right there, and that's right from the study. And so that right there should paint the picture of why it feels like our population is just really susceptible to being a little bit more screen addicted, let's say, because they are children, adolescents, and young adults for the most part of who we treat, right? And so, yes, that's the population. And again, I can, walk down the street and knock on 10 doors and find, adolescents who are misusing their screen time, and my kids too. I mean, my kids are 15 and 17, and for sure, they are not inherently responsible.
Yeah. Same guilty here too, for sure. Yeah.
Right. They're not, kind of taking agency over their own behavior. So a couple of things about that. So one, just in general, because, and they give reasons for this, because children, adolescents, and young adults have the tendency to seek reinforcement and poorly self-regulate. So now we look at the autism population and they're like super reinforcement seekers and super averse to self-regulation. I shouldn't say averse, super not tending toward self-regulation, right?
Right.
So we know that self-regulation is a huge problem in our population, but it's also a problem for children, adolescents, and adults. It's just magnified when you add on the autism diagnosis. So we already treat an at-risk population in general just because of their age. And then we add on top of that, let's say, an autism diagnosis that just enhances all of those characteristics, and it's just sort of hot mess express in our population. So what are the characteristics we're looking for besides high reward seeking and low self-regulation? We're looking at the apps themselves and how they're designed to keep us engaged. Again, not an autism thing. This is a human thing. And, you and I can say like, yeah, we went down the wormhole, right? Like that's just seems sort of like a colloquial term for I binge watched my reels yesterday, or I stayed on YouTube a little too long, or whatever the case may be. But everyone tends towards these things because of how these apps are designed. So there is a metric called TOP, time on platform, and what, Instagram, Facebook, X, Reddit, I don't know. There's, all of the different social media platforms, all of the places, YouTube, everywhere where we're getting our entertainment, let's just say, or, pacifying our time. They are designed to keep you on their platform. That's a metric they use to say, okay, users are not staying on our platform as long. What can we design to make them stay on our platform longer? Because these are businesses. They're not just these free resources out there to like just, entertain. They're intended to create revenue, right? So they want to keep people on their platforms as long as possible. It seems nefarious, but it's a business model, and it's a business model that we as humans are very susceptible to. So there's that. So now put a child in front of that, and we can now see why we get tantrums in any population. I mean, I've seen it at Target. I've seen it at the swimming pool. It doesn't matter. If you take the device away from the child, there is a very high likelihood that they are going to have a tantrum or a behavior against it, right? It's
Yeah.
of the design, right?
Yeah. And you'd think the nature of that transition from time in, as it were, to not necessarily time out, but anything else.
Yeah.
Is going to be that much more
Pronounced.
harsh. The juxtaposition or the contrast between those two conditions are going to be magnified all the more because your screen time is so, the reinforcement is coming with such magnitude and frequency, so everything else, everything else kind of stinks by comparison.
Totally. And don't forget the serotonin and the dopamine and all of those happy hormones that are getting produced along with it. So it's not just like, oh, I'm watching something funny and that's cute and that's like, okay, here's your phone back. It's, I got a hit of something that feels really good and I want to keep getting a hit on that. And so then this kind of brings us back to the certain personality types that are more impacted over others. Is there are personalities, myself included, that could care less about what I'm watching on my screen. Like I'll watch something, I'll binge it a little bit, and then I'll be like, I'm tired. It's 10 o'clock. I'm going to bed. And I have no problem putting my stuff away. Zero. I I can't remember if I talked about this last time, but I live in the JOMO, the joy of missing out.
Mm,
I don't
you did
care.
mention that, yeah.
Yes, I don't care what's going on online. I don't care what's going on with my friends. I love my friends. I really don't care what they're posting. I'd rather talk to them in person. But I've always been that even since college. Like I've always been that way. I was always the one who at the end of the night, it's 11 o'clock. Good night, guys. I'm going back to the dorm. Go have fun. I have no concern about what's happening after that. So again, that's personality type. Not all humans are designed like that. A lot of humans are really sucked into this world of like this continuous like dopamine hit, this continuous scroll, this kind of need to keep going, or, it's intermittent reinforcement at its best. I always use like, the dog videos, right? Like you'll scroll and get like a really cute golden doodle video and it's a joy and you're happy and it's like, oh, that's so cute. And it really hits the dopamine hard. And then you get someone commenting on this, someone commenting on that, some like teen influencer, blah, 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 blah. And like you keep going and then, here's another one. So cute, like heart, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so this is that intermittent reinforcement at play. So, I mean, you can really put anything in front of a human and that's our response to those emotional pings that we get when we're watching it. But so the platform itself is designed that way. So that's thing one. So that's thing one that we have to understand. And so how does this really impact sleep, right? So if we're really talking about sleep and screen time, we're really looking at screen time use as at bedtime. And why is it so bad at bedtime if we have people like me who are like, I'll just go to bed now because it's 10 o'clock and I'm tired. Whereas someone else might say like, not even look at the clock and before they know it, it's midnight. So now we get into kind of like the user issue. Now we get into the problem with the actual human who's using and engaging in screen time. And that's where we really find this personality type divide. So let's look at what happens at bedtime, right? So if we are the kind of personality type who really finds it hard to disconnect from their screen. So I'm going to repeat, it's children, adolescents, and young adults. They're going to have trouble, period. They're going to have trouble terminating their screens. Like that's just that. And then we go into the adult population and then it's kind of like, okay, some adults can regulate, some adults can't. So what happens is we end up spending more time on screens and less time sleeping. Then we have to usually wake up at the same time the next day. So we're shortening our entire sleep duration. So that's one thing. The other thing is people who fall asleep watching it, right? Maybe we fall asleep actually looking at our screens. This happens, with television too. So it can actually kind of breach the walls of screen time, handheld screen time, and go into TV watching. Or like you gave the example of reading a book, right? Sometimes you'll get so immersed in a book that you'll totally lose track of time and suddenly it's midnight and you've been reading your book. It's the same sort of personality type tendencies that will delay sleep onset for the benefit of something enjoyable. Now, to what degree that's impacting, every night sleep? Is it that, okay, you were reading a great book right now and it happened to be super interesting. And so for 2 or 3 nights, you delayed your sleep onset? Or is it happening every single night? For most people who are using screens as a sleep aid, it's happening every night. And so every night they're truncating their total amount of sleep because they're just replacing it with screen time instead of sleep. And we don't wind down in its presence and we're not giving ourselves the amount of time we need to sort of get into that sleepy phase. And then there goes the dominoes, right?
I see. One of the things that you touched on in your Oklahoma talk is, kind of just doing anything, non-sleep activity in bed, what's the term for that? I thought there was a like actual sleep science term for that, or maybe I'm misremembering. Anyway,
Just
but
call it
like,
a sleep stealer.
Yeah. So like, whether it's, watching television
Yeah.
or, scrolling Instagram or whatever, those are not conducive activities to engage in while you're in bed,
Yeah.
because they decouple the relationship between bed and sleep. Okay, well, I appreciate the caution there. So and I could see how, again, I'm speculating here, but some of those activities might be more to the extent to which they may be disruptive. Perhaps some are more than others, I suppose. But like is reading like a book, like on like an actual paper book, not like a
Yeah.
Kindle, that you know is that worse than other thing? Like how like it's a very personal question. By the way, I want to know, like, should I go read somewhere else? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not having a terrible time falling asleep, but
So I'll tell you, okay, so this is the beauty of this study, and this is what this particular study has opened up in my mind as far as treatment. It used to be that I would say 100% read a paper book, get off your Kindle or whatever thing that's, backlit in LED lighting. It's stopping your melatonin production and, just no screens at all. Opt for the paper book, opt for the Sudoku or crosswords or whatever. And I would say before this study came out, I was a hard line, no screens in bed, anything but. And then, anything you do could be done in bed, but, i- as long as it's conducive to falling asleep, right? But there's nuance in that, right? So I'll give you a case example. I had a participant in the sleep collective. This was 2 cohorts ago. And everyone brings their own like learner. It doesn't have to be someone from the autism population or a client per se. It could be, I always say it could be a sister, a cousin, an aunt, a child, like, whatever, some human that's over the age of 1 year. So she had her 10-year-old daughter. And her 10-year-old daughter kind of tended to be a little bit more on the anxious side as she was reporting. And she would read in bed, which mom thought was a great, before bed activity, which was probably not wrong. But for this particular child, what we found was that the reading was so obsessive that it was functioning in the same way as screen time might, where she was delaying her own sleep onset for an hour or two and wasn't falling asleep until midnight because she was so obsessively reading. So is reading in bed inherently bad? No. And I think I even started out by saying like none of these things are inherently bad. But now what this study sort of highlighted for me was that not all activities are created equal for every single learner, right? There are kids. So I'll circle back to the screen time. What we now see is that there are families who might watch an episode of Bluey in the bedtime routine and then shut down the device, put their child in bed, and their child falls asleep in 10 or 15 minutes. I'm not going to go back to that family and say, get rid of Bluey. Screen time shouldn't be in your bedtime routine because it's working for that family. Might there be another family who does the same thing, but when they turn the screen off, their child goes into tantrum mode and now it's a big behavior and now it's a huge problem. So they continue watching multiple episodes of Bluey way into the night past where we might want the child to fall asleep. That same behavior, that same presentation of a stimulus, watching an episode of Bluey, might be totally effective in one household and totally ineffective in another household. So I think it opens up the conversation for not all things are either bad or good. It really just takes sort of a sensitivity. I'll Dr. Phil you for a second, if for those of you who grew up on Dr. Phil, but how's that working for you?
right.
Right? How's that working for you? Is the episode of whatever totally easily terminated and then they go right into bed and they're happy? Well, yeah, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm not going to say like, go now redo your whole bedtime routine if the bedtime routine is great and it leads to falling asleep quickly at the time that the child should be falling asleep. But if it's not working, I'm going to say it's not working and it's not sustainable and we should probably find some other, treatment, a different kind of bedtime routine that's going to allow the child to fall asleep in a timely fashion, that they're going to be able to disconnect from easily and fall asleep under calm conditions. So, I mean, I think that is kind of where we should have been for a long time. And I think the blue light piece was like, oh, it was the science saying this is bad. And like, now, and I think it just opens up a lot more opportunities for us to be a little bit more discriminative with, okay, like, is this working for your family? If it's working for your family, I'm not one to come in and be like, let's, turn over this whole thing when it's working,
Yeah. And again, I think it's another way to highlight what behavior analysts can bring to bear
Yeah.
on determining whether there's a problem in the first place or not. Maybe, like, to your point, blue may not be a problem
all the time. If it's not, I say it all the time. If it's not a problem, it's not a problem.
Right.
Right. A lot of families will say, "Oh, I know I shouldn't be doing that," and I'll just say, like, "Well, is it a problem? Like, is this really bad? Is it as bad as you think it is?" Like, sometimes it's not as bad as we think it is. It's fairly benign.
Or like another saying, it's the dose that makes the poison. So yeah, what 15 minutes of Bluey versus the Bluey marathon until you pass out because you're just so exhausted, the body has nothing else to do but to shut down. Those are two very different behavioral repertoires.
Yeah, and sorry to cut you, to insert myself in your thought right there, but it also messes up the whole sleep cycle the remainder of the night. So sleep architecture doesn't look good under the conditions where a child is just crashing to sleep after their Bluey marathon. So not only does it delay sleep onset, but it destroys sleep quality. Very often causing multiple night awakenings, just a segmented sleep, and all kinds of other garbage. And then they have to wake up at whatever time to get to ABA session. It's like the families drop them off at session, like, good luck.
Sure. You mentioned the term. I don't know if this is just a figure of speech or if this is an actual term in the sleep literature, but you said sleep architecture. What do you mean by that?
Sleep architecture is how sleep looks from a brain wave, like a wavelength standpoint throughout the night. So sleep architecture in its core is how each phase of sleep is sort of set up throughout the night. So what does that mean? So we're supposed to get the majority of okay, let me backtrack for like a half a second. I know we're kind of coming up on time here. Anyone over the age of about 4 or 5 months has a 4-phase sleep cycle. What does that mean? That means we have our REM cycle, which is our dream state, and then we have 3 phases of deeper phase of sleep, with like level 3 basically being the deepest sleep you can get. So assume we have a 4-phase sleep cycle. Everyone over the age of 4 or 5 months of age has a 4-phase sleep cycle. If we look across the night, right, and if you have an Oura Ring, or I think the Whoop strap does this also, right, it kind of lays it out for you. If you have one of these wearables, you might get a little sleep map sort of spit out in the morning for you. But you'll notice that the deepest phases of sleep that we get are sort of consolidated to the beginning of the night. And most of our dreaming and our lighter phases of sleep are sort of consolidated to the last bit of the night. And so what that looks like is like kind of, when I look at sleep architecture across, let's say, 8 to 10 hours, right, which is kind of the average amount of sleep for an older child all the way through adulthood, you'll see the first 2 or 3 hours are very, very dense with deep sleep, where we're just comatose. Like, we are just like dead to the world. It's deep sleep. All of the good stuff is happening biologically. Our brain is detoxing. Our gut is regenerating all of the good, like, T cells, and all the great stuff happens in really deep sleep. And then after the first like 2 or 3 hours of sleep, we cycle into kind of our second, it's not even half, it's like thirds, right? So the first third of the night and the last 2/3 of the night. The last 2/3 of the night are pretty much spent in dream sleep. And then our other 2 deeper phases of sleep, which aren't as deep as like the beginning of the night, but they're still fairly deep, but mostly dreams and kind of lighter sleep. So that's kind of sleep architecture. It's how sleep is built up across the night, and it looks, or should look, fairly the same from human to human. where we consolidate our deep sleep at the beginning of the night, get more REM sleep and dreams at the latter half of the night. In general, doesn't look exactly the same with each, like minute by minute. The play by play is different from person to person. But in general, that's kind of what I talk about with sleep architecture. So when we say with sleep architecture being messed up, it can delay how long we spend in deep sleep, how long we spend in our dream phases of sleep, how long it takes us to access deep sleep, how long it takes us to access our lighter phases of sleep. So sleep architecture gets pushed and pulled around depending on how late we delay our sleep, right? If we just go to bed too late, but have to wake up at a certain time in the morning, we're basically cutting off our REM sleep in the morning, which is very important for emotional regulation, right? So we could be cutting off 2 or 3 hours of dream sleep, which is super important for, especially for the autism population who really needs that self-regulation, right? In the same way, and so we can look at that, so like taking away time at sleep. But then this is a whole other episode, but if we're using sedatives, if we're using sleep aids for adults who are using, THC or alcohol or something to help them fall asleep, that also ruins sleep architecture. So what we find is people who take some kind of sedative medication to help them fall asleep at bedtime, well, that's great. It's going to kind of solve the problem in the same way that letting your child just fall asleep watching TV or watching, their iPad helps that same kind of illusion of falling asleep, right? It makes bedtime better, let's say. But then the next day we wake up feeling just totally wrecked. It ruins our sleep architecture. And so we wake up feeling worse. We wake up feeling groggy, unrested. We wake up feeling moody. We've got kids having tantrums all day long, regardless of population, right? You walk into, Target or Walmart and you see the kid like totally like besides themselves. And I'm like, ooh, you need some more sleep, kid.
Very likely. Very likely. All right,
Great.
that's helpful. I appreciate you walking us through that as well. That's good information. All right, so a lot of new information. Screens aren't it's not the devil incarnate as we previously thought. It's more this shouldn't surprise us that the answer is more nuanced and contextual, and there's variability from person to person.
The worst answer, it depends.
Right. We should not be shocked by virtue of our training to learn that. All right. So we know where people can go to get a hold of you at readysetsleep.com. And I'll have the link to that in the show notes for this episode, as well as that generous coupon code. Thank you for that. And then I guess lastly, what would be maybe you could take us out, Emily, by, if a behavior analyst has a chance to talk with parents, let's say someone's working at a clinic and they've got or in home, they got, they have parent training opportunities and things like that. What are some good questions that the BCBA can ask the parent to kind of get at least a window of or some insight into maybe what might be going on sleep-wise with or to determine whether it is a problem, things like that.
Yeah. I never come out of the starting gate by asking, how's your child sleep? I'll say don't ask it that way. Sleep is really sensitive, and many families would rather, not all families, but many families, a segment of the population would rather just sort of hide it away because there's bigger fish to fry, right? We want you working on speech and we want you working on, all the other self-regulation kind of things. And, and then sometimes there's some embarrassing or shameful things that families interpret as not being, important, or maybe they just don't want to share it with you, something like that.
Yeah.
So usually I ask, I say, tell me about your child's sleep. Are you happy with the current sleep situation? Are you happy with how much sleep they're getting at night? Are you happy with their quality of sleep? That's usually how I'll present it to a family. What I encourage people to do when they're doing their initial assessments, like their intakes with families, to resist the checkbox of, does your child have sleep problems? Yes or no, because families will just say no because they don't think it's relevant, because most people, average people, just don't really understand the role sleep plays in daytime behavior. So most families will opt for no. Are there problems? Yes or no? So more like, describe your child's sleep challenges. Tell me about it. Like, welcome it in as okay, I know there's probably a sleep problem, so just tell me more about it instead of, kind of leading with, well, is there or isn't there? Kind of assuming that there is, because I mean, the statistics are, what is it, like 40 to 80% of kids on the spectrum have trouble with sleep. So we can pretty safely assume that there's probably something going on. And I'll tell you, it's very easy to tell whether there's a sleep problem or not just by the way the family responds. Because, tell me about tell me about your child's sleep. Are you happy with how much they're getting? It's either going to sound like, yeah, it's okay, which is a red flag, meaning like it's probably terrible. The families who are sleeping well, it's going to sound like this. Oh my gosh, thank God sleep is the one thing we don't
Right.
worry about. It will come out with total joy. It will be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that sleep isn't something we have to deal with.
Yeah, or they'll say, it's something we've worked very hard on, and now we've got it down pat, and
Yes.
we're very, so it's like there's some intentionality as it relates to the whole
Yes.
routine and
1,000%.
yeah.
Yeah, parents will say like, we worked really hard on it, and now it's like it will be something that they will like raise their hands and praise if it's going really well. And any other kind of answer, we might want to like scratch the surface a little bit more over time if they're not being more, very forthcoming with it. But always asking if they're happy. I mean, are you happy with your child's sleep quality? Are you satisfied with how they're sleeping at night, with the sleep configuration, with, what they're achieving? Are you happy with it? And if they're not happy, they might say, well, no, it's terrible, but we just don't really want to work on it right now. Usually it's because they think it's going to be a huge job. And usually because they've been punished in the past and it's been aversive in the past when they've tried things. And I always like take it a little slower with those families and just, assure them that we're not going to ever stimulate the really big behaviors for their families, because we don't want sleep to be aversive for anybody, or the process of achieving sleep to be aversive for anybody, first and foremost. So
Yeah, that's pretty insightful stuff to leave us with, Emily. I'm hearing, that there's an importance of not making assumptions, and also recognizing what the odds are, while at the same time approaching it with the level of sensitivity, so you don't become off-putting and detract from any progress that you might have made otherwise had you approached it in a different way. So really, really smart. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming back on the podcast. It's always fun chatting with you. Go to readysetsleep.com, folks, if you want to learn more. And yeah, we'll talk to you down the road, Emily. Thanks a lot.
yeah, thanks, Matt. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.